Hello everyone and welcome to another endgame episode with Coach B and MasterChess.com. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how to convert a complex position into a more simple position that it's easier to manage. Also, how to correctly evaluate the challenging position. To do that, I will use the flowchart method introduced by International Master Jeremy Silman, which is a very easy concept to understand and apply. So let's get started. In this first position, it's black to move, and the questions that need to be answered are, is this a winning position or is this a draw? We can probably sense that black should win because he is up 2 pawns, but yet those pawns are on the same file. How can we analyze this position and play the right moves? Well, first, you need to have some basic knowledge of easier positions that are related to the given position. Those will be your flowcharts. So let's go through those basic examples. You'll see that most of these deal with the rook versus rook and pawn on the 7th rank. And here's our first flowchart. With white to move in this position and the black king out in the open, he can easily win giving a check on f8, and after the king moves over, he's going to promote and then he's going to capture the rook and win the game. Another way to win in this position is if the opponent's king is on the same rank as the pawn on any of the highlighted files. After rook to h8, here black is totally lost. If he captures the pawn, then white will simply skewer the king and capture the rook. And if the king attacks the rook, white will simply promote and then win black's rook and win the game. And here's our next flowchart. Here with white to move, there's absolutely nothing he can do to get a win here. If the defending king is on the same rank with the pawn on g7 and h7, there is absolutely nothing that white can do to be able to push for a win. I'm just going to fast forward through a possible try by white, but you will see that he's not going to be able to be successful. As soon as he touches the pawn though, black needs to remember to check the king, separating him from the pawn, and then white cannot make any progress, and this is a dead draw. This next position is the same position as before, except that white has an extra pawn on the h file. Well, here, again, there's absolutely nothing that white can do to be able to push for a win. Black just needs to be careful here not to take the pawn, as white will be able to win the game after that. However, coming back, if black is not going to take that pawn, he's going to be able to achieve a draw. Again, as soon as white touches the pawn, black needs to make sure he checks the king, and then white cannot make any progress, and a draw will be achieved. The next flowchart involves a pawn on the knight file, and this has the same result. This is again a dead draw. There's absolutely nothing that white can do here to be able to push for a win. He's not going to be able to be successful. And we can see that white cannot make any progress. In this next flowchart, white has a bishop pawn, and here white is able to win. All he has to do is simply march that pawn forward, and he's going to be able to win this game. After pawn to f6 check, black is totally lost. There's absolutely nothing he can do. If he moves to h7, that pawn will march forward to becoming a queen. Even rook to f1 will not stop it. That pawn will promote. The rook will be sacrificed, and white will win the game. Coming back, if here black tries king to f7, we saw that after rook to h8, white will be able to skewer the black king and win the rook. And the other try is king takes on f6, but now the king is in the open. After rook to f8, white will win the game. We can now start complicating the positions to see how we can use this basic knowledge, those flowcharts that we've just been through, to correctly assess more difficult positions. So if we look in this position, white is defending this time, and he has an extra pawn on the g file, blocking the pawn on g5. Knowing the basic knowledge, white here needs to know that this is a dead draw even if he loses the pawn on g4, and he shouldn't try to defend it. Actually, that will lose this game. So let's go through this position, and I'm just going to stop at the critical moments. So here, as black cannot penetrate through the blocking of the rook, he's going to have to chase that rook away. So he's simply going to go towards the rook. And now he's going to be able to make progress towards the pawn. So here, white needs to be careful. He needs to just let that pawn go. He shouldn't go defend this pawn. If he defends that pawn with king to h3, well, now he's going to lose this game, as rook to h1 check. The king will move away, and then he's going to lose the game. However, coming back to this position, white doesn't need to worry about black taking that pawn. He could simply move the rook to a8, and after the black king takes that pawn, there's really nothing that black can do. Here, the black king cannot push white's king away. He's simply just going to move the rook up and down. So the only other try he has is moving the king towards the pawn on the a file to let the rook go. But after he defends that pawn, white needs to remember that he needs to separate the king from the pawn with a simple check. So here, rook to b8 check. The king will move away, the rook will return behind the pawn, and black cannot make any progress. So coming back to our original position, there's just one more flash chart that we need to be familiar with in order to correctly play this position. So let's go over that, and then we will return to our original position. And here's our last flow chart. In this position, black has an extra bishop pawn, but is being blocked by a white pawn on f4. So knowing the basic knowledge, we know that if black manages to capture the pawn on f4, then he's going to be able to win this game, as that's a winning endgame. And obviously white is going to try to prevent that. However, with correct play, he's not going to be able to do that. So let's pass through the position and stop at the critical moments. So first, because black cannot penetrate through the 6th rank as white's rook is defending that, he's going to have to chase the rook away. And now that the rook is chased away, he's going to go and try to capture that pawn. And here, white needs to be careful. He cannot capture the pawn on f5. That will be a terrible mistake, as black can simply move over and then promote the pawn and win the game. But he can simply retreat here. Now, this is a crucial moment. Here, the correct move is king to e4. Coming back, if he makes the mistake of moving the king to e3, well, now after rook to a4, black cannot capture that pawn, and he's going to need to retreat. So after king to e4, if white attacks the king with rook to a4 and he moves away to e3, now white is in Zugzwang. He cannot protect the pawn anymore. If he moves the king to g3 to protect the pawn, well, again, the rook will simply come with the check on g1 and he's going to be able to win this game. And coming back, if the rook needs to move, again, the rook cannot leave the a file, so the only other thing that he has is rook to a3 check, but now black is able to capture the pawn, and therefore he's going to be able to win the game simply marching the pawn forward, as we've seen in the previous flowchart position. So now coming back to our original position, we should be able to see that black is indeed winning. First, he needs to be able to bring the pawn on the a file to the 7th rank. If he accomplishes that, then all he needs to do is simply sacrifice one of the pawns on the f file, use the king to capture white's pawn, and then push the other pawn on the f file to win. So let's go through this process. So here, first, black will move the pawn to a4. After something like king to f2, rook to a1, king to f3, pawn to a3. Here, white needs to be super careful. He's not going to be able to join the battle against the pawns on the f file. If he makes the mistake of moving the king to f4, well, after pawn to a2, white is totally lost. He has no shelter, and if he tries to retreat, well, it's too late, because after rook to f1, king to e2, the pawn will promote and black will win the game. So coming back after pawn to a3, here white is forced to move the king to g2. And now after black pushes the pawn to a2, we've accomplished the first target. After this, let's say king to h2, black will simply march the pawn to f4. White doesn't have any options. If he doesn't capture, black is simply going to march that pawn, and we saw that that's going to lead into a win. And if he does capture the pawn with g takes f4, after pawn to f5, we've reached the last flowchart that we've looked at, and here black is winning. And I'm just going to fast forward through the moves so you could see how he's going to be able to accomplish that. Let's say here white will move the rook to a6, checking the black king, moving it back. Well, after king to f7, black's goal is to chase the rook away. So he's simply going to start coming towards the rook to chase it away. And now white is forced to move the rook away. And after he's accomplished that, he's simply going to go and now try to capture white's pawn. And now we've reached our critical moment, and we saw that after rook to a4 and king to e3, there's nothing that white can do here to prevent black from capturing the pawn. After something like king to h2 and king to f3, rook to a5, king takes on f4, and now black will win the game. And black is winning the game. So as you saw in this video, any complicated position can be simplified if you have basic knowledge of the type of endgame that you are dealing with. Those are your flowcharts that you should try to achieve. This method can be used in pawn endgames or any other endgames. Even in the middle game, you can start thinking about how will the endgame look like and try to trade and simplify the position to a known flowchart that you are familiar with. Coaching high school chess for over 15 years now, going over hundreds if not thousands of games, and reading dozens and dozens of books, I've put all those basic positions in a beginner to master course that you will find in my playlist and on my website masterchess.com, where you could also practice these lessons against the computer. If you like my videos, make sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time with the next episode.